we have a great lineup of speakers. We've got Joe Sanders kicking things off, technical director with RPS, but formerly of Affinity Water. Then we've got David Jacobs, who's leakage strategy manager with Anglian Water. We have Paul Taylor, who's assurance manager with Severn Trent, and Jez Heath, who's the innovation manager with SES Water, will be finishing things off. And I hope that will leave a little bit of time for questions. If you can post them in your chat box. I've been having problems getting access to that. I don't know why Teams has suddenly decided to hide it. So I might have to hand over management of that to one of the others, but they're all perfectly capable of doing that. So I won't wait any further. I will hand over to Joe to introduce the leakage route map to you, which, as you can see, I was the project manager for that. And I'm totally biased, but I think it's a really exciting project with a fantastic output. Okay, Joe.
Thank you. Cheers, Joe. Much appreciated. And it's great to be back presenting to the Pipeline Industries Guild almost a decade ago when I was a young person, as was the definition, and sort of presenting and finally actually won a prize for that one. So maybe we'll win a prize today. Who knows? But yeah, I just wanted to talk about the leakage route map and particularly how we developed it and some of the outputs, and then hand over to some of the water industry and water company colleagues to sort of put a little bit more fruit on the bones maybe. So a team of 3 consultancies, myself, Dean Marshall Say from Artesia, and Glenn Mountford from WRC led there, but lots of input from all of our organisations to sort of do that, and also lots of input from Bob Taylor, Peter Simpson and Stuart Ledger as the CEOs sort of in charge of this particular project. She was the project manager and kept us on track, and I'm sure she'll be popping up and telling us that we're going over too long on our slides in a few minutes time, but let's get on, shall we? So why do we need the leakage route map? There was 2 documents when we actually published this. There's now a 3rd one that's come in that we need to sort of take care of, and those 2 documents were the public interest commitment that all the water companies put forward to say that they were going to triple the rate of reduction by getting a lot of feedback, by 2030. So they were going to triple the rate of reduction based on their 2017, 2018 values. And then the 2nd document was the NIC, a drier future, which said we had to reduce leakage by 50% by 2050, so in 30 years, and that equates to about 1,300 megalitres. So the good old, that's around 525 Olympic swimming pools a day that we need to reduce. And as I say, I'm surprised that Ofwat doesn't ask us to put leakage figures in Olympic swimming pools these days, as that seems to be the key metric that's used. We've also now got this 3rd point that's come in with the Environment Act 2021, and the consultation that's out at the moment has put in another point just around there at 2037 that says 31.7% of leakage reduction from the 17-18 values. So most people on that sort of darker blue line will be fine. The lighter blue line would just miss that if you went straight to the 2050. So that's why it's needed. And again, you can see the history of leakage back there. And if you want more detail in that, we go into quite a lot of detail in the report, which is available on the Water UK website to sort of go in and have a look at what the history was. So if I can click on the slide. So what are the challenges then that these sort of give. And this graph shows the leakage in litres per property along the X and the leakage in meters cubed per kilometre on the Y. So looking at a density of these networks, and again understanding the sort of the different bits and pieces that need to be looked at as we're looking at leakage. And you can see there's a dot for each of the water companies there where their current position of leakage is at 2020. The two lines, so the PIC 2030 line is there in that light blue frontier. So by 2030, the average of all the water companies has to be on that line. So you can see that Bristol and Anglian Water are already ahead of that line. The rest have got to catch up. Some will have to go past as well, on the assumption that not everyone will be able to get to that line. And then by 2050, the darker blue line, again, that you can see that everyone's got a way to move forward. And there's quite a few different things that we need to do to get to there. And again, the fundamentals of leakage: what is background leakage? What is it made up of? How can we fix background leakage? What's customer side leakage? How can we tackle customer side leakage? And also, how much of the target can we achieve by just doing what we're doing at the moment? And I think maybe from a Pipeline Industries Guild point of view, then the asset health and the sort of the network's health as it is really important. And how does that get impacted by leakage, or how does improving the asset health improve leakage as well? So these were things that we had to look through over the 9 months of the project that we did. And we did it in 3 phases. The first one was that we looked at a lot of international and historical pieces of information, interviewing best practice organisations from across the world, looking at the different performances and regulatory drivers, and identifying blockers that would stop further progress. Then we had a second phase, which was in the middle of lockdown, and hence the Miro board that you can see there from the outputs in the workshop. This would have been doodles all over white paper, I'm sure, a couple of years ago, but now here we are with this sort of full Miro board, and lots of the workshop was not just the supply chain, but also water companies, and pretty much everyone that's speaking today was involved in that workshops, and there was 4 or 5 of those that we did over the summer of last year, again looking at stress testing some of the scenarios, but also looking at blockers. And then there was an awful lot of modelling that had to be done to sort of see what the costs were. We looked at some scenarios, looked at how they would play out, and also looked at sort of different things in the way that we could make leakage maybe more palatable for people and easier to do. So what happens if we had a cheap sensor? What happens if we had a more expensive sensor? That type of stuff. And it came up with 4 scenarios, and I really don't have time, unfortunately, to go into detail of these 4 scenarios. And as to say, the route maps up on the Water UK website, and you can download a copy, and it explains all of these. But top left is very much the easy, low-hanging fruit, we called it. So this is continuing on the way that we would do normally and do at the moment. Would we achieve the targets? And as you can see, you do right at the very sort of like spread of the uncertainty, but it's very unlikely that you will. Scenario 2 started to talk more about smart networks and smart metering, and looking at those in a different way and improving those. And again, you start to get nearer to the target. Scenario 3 was more of an asset-driven scenario where more asset renewals was done, more pipe laying. And again, we'll come on to that. It's not just pipe laying, but it's specifically laying leak-free networks, not just sort of 80% or 90% leak-free, 100% leak-free networks. And I think that's a key sort of part that we'll hopefully discuss a little bit more as we go through the presentations. And then the 4th one was very much lots of mains renewals, customer supply pipes being adopted, being renewed as part of the mains renewals. And as you can see, from a leakage point of view, a lot less risky. However, and again, it's in the route map, you can see the costs that are associated with those pieces. So the proposed approach was that we came up with what we call an adaptive pathway approach. So not everyone's going to do the same things. You're going to have to make changes during the middle of AMP periods, depending on how your leakage performance is and depending on other parts of the business as well. And again, just in the way that we've seen this in the last few months, the CSO debate and how much money potentially will be needed for that particular ODI in the future and in Environmental Act targets, that will mean that there'll be a change in the leakage pathways potentially, and so you have to adapt to where you're doing these things. One of the things we've very much said is that this is information sharing as well, and it's not just within the water companies, but it's the whole supply chain to the nth degree, and making sure that we get as much detail out of that supply chain that you're representing, but also making sure that we're sharing it in a way that is open, honest, and sort of almost the badges at the door. This is a national target that we're trying to get to, working together in that respect. We don't, however, expect each company just to go and do one of those scenarios. What they'll actually do is likely do a mixture of all the scenarios to get them to where they need to be. And this will change for each of the water companies. They're all in subtly different starting positions and also got different ways in where they've concentrated their work previously. So some have already done a lot of pressure management. Some have already done a lot of smart metering. Some have done none at all, so that might be more for some of the companies, but less for others. And as you go through there, again, major replacement, again, some of the percentages are quite low at the moment, 0.4, 0.5%. We're talking increases to 2.5% per annum, potentially with this by 2030. So quite a large increase in the mains renewals that will be required. But again, making sure that that's leak-free mains renewals and new networks rather than not leaky networks that we have at the moment, but not zero leaks, which is what we're going to need in the future. So what came out of it was 9 key commitments that we had that the water companies have signed up to. And in fact, on Monday, the Leakage Network met and myself and Dean went through a plan of how to sort of tackle each one of these. And that will be a further document that will be coming out, we hope, via Water UK, or not a document, but a sort of press release of how these things are progressing. But I just want to pick up on a couple of them that would be specifically interesting to the Pipeline Industries Guild. Again, we've already talked about the information and knowledge sharing, and again, this has to be across everywhere. The improved asset renewal selection based on not just leakage, but also asset health. So we've got very good at selecting the burstiest pipes to replace and do asset renewals on. That's what the targets have been for the last few AMPs. We're now looking at, okay, well, how do we sort of also find the leakiest pipes and also then do the asset health on those as well? And that asset health might not just be bursts, it might also be water quality and other factors. So looking at everything in the round. And then very much this code of practice on how to lay mains without any leaks. And myself and Joe have been doing some work to try and push this forward, and hopefully there's an UpQueer project coming out that will be looking at why new networks do leak, especially around the plastic ones, and hopefully a lot of learning will come from that to help with that piece of work. But just to summarize, and again, before we go into the water company representatives, just some of the real key messages that we got around from the leakage routemap. So leakage privatisation, it's been a good thing. Again, we've made sort of really big reductions. However, there's definitely a focus now on the reductions set out by the PIC and the NIC commitment. And this sort of can be seen by the end of 2020, the water companies delivered their lowest levels of leakage for 30 years, which I think is real positive. And again, the supply chain and the water companies working together. The aspirations for the PIC and the NIC at 2030 and 2050 are achievable, but they will need us to change the way in which we fund leakage activities. Again, that more towards asset renewal looks to be the way that the sort of the models are taking us. However, those are obviously the more costly ways to remove leakage from the network. And so innovation is really going to sort of play a part in this to help reduce those costs. The risks on key decisions really do have to be made in the next year or so. And again, based on that output of the meeting we had on Monday, we're now starting to make sure we're pushing those forward. Again, the right decisions have to be made, but these can be adapted from a point to sort of push those forward. And then there's also the investment in innovation as a key enabler. And again, hopefully there's some great ideas out in the supply chain that can help us push those forward. But it's really going to have to be that cross-sector, working with the water companies, using things like Spring or Uckware to really help us sort of push those things forward. So with that, I'm done. And Joe only pops up right at the very end, so I don't think I'm too far over time. Yeah, you're on mute, Joe.
Great. Thank you very much. And yeah, just a little bit over time. Joe mentioned that we'd be hearing from the water companies, and so we move to David, who will be talking about the impact of the route map and the targets on Anglian Water and what they're doing about it. Just before he starts, a reminder to type messages into the chat box. We've had one interesting question so far, and I have got access to it now, having re-logged in on my laptop. So David.
Thank you, Joe. Good afternoon, everybody. So David Jacobs, I'm Leakage Strategy Manager at Anglian Water. So I'm going to spend about the next 10 minutes or so talking to you about how we intend to use the principles that have been set out in the route map, really to inform our 25-year water resource management plan and our PR24 submission, especially around how we set our leakage strategy. Okay, so we saw this graph earlier in Joe's presentation, which shows the relative positions of the UK industry using data from last year. And as Joe said, Anglian is one of the companies down in the bottom left-hand corner of the graph, at the frontier of the industry in terms of leakage performance. But in Anglian, we've got some severe pressures on our supply-demand balance over the next 25 years. We've got increased growth coming into our region. Our proximity to London in the southeast means up to 1 million extra properties potentially in our patch that we have to supply water to. We see continuing pressure on our abstraction licenses from the EA, and we're having to reduce the water that we can abstract in certain areas. And then we also seen the impacts of climate change, which are changing the way that our water resources are recharged. So all of that really means over the next 25-year period, there's going to be less water around for us to abstract and more demand for what is there. So yeah, we have to do something, and it means that leakage, we'll have to do something to make sure that customer security of supply is maintained, and leakage is one of the key tools that will stay in our toolbox to help meet that supply-demand balance going forwards. So we plan to exceed the two target lines that we can see on the graph ahead of time. And how are we going to do that? Well, our strategy to date really has been twofold. We use find and fix to maintain leakage levels in DMAs that have got already low leakage, and then we have capital interventions to drive leakage down in the high leakage DMAs. So things like optimisation, mains replacement, customer metering, and we'll plan to continue that strategy going forwards. But before we can talk about reducing leakage, what's important is that we maintain leakage in the well-performing DMAs. Now, this graph shows the numbers of repairs that we are having to do each year, really to hit our targets and to perform. And what you can see is that after the winter of 10-11, we saw a big increase in repairs needed. For a couple of years, really, and that was driven. Well, initially we saw lots of burst mains in that winter, but then following on from that, there's a lag before all the leaks become visible or get detected on the services. But it did go back to sort of normal-ish levels after that. But then it's crept up again, especially following the beast in the east in late 2000 or early 2018 and the hot summer of 2018. You can see how the numbers of repairs has gone through the roof. And that trend is it is still continuing. We don't know whether that's going to drop back off again like it did after that severe winter in 10-11, whether that is now going to be the new norm and that's going to carry on growing. A lot of these bursts, leaks they're not from the mains. Burst main numbers are pretty stable over this period. The work that we're doing around network optimization and around targeted mains replacement, around targeted to remove burst clusters, is maintaining the burst numbers. So this is all service pipe issues, so COM pipes, stop taps, customer supply side leaks. And stop taps becoming a particular issue for us, we think, as one of the companies that started installing domestic meters earliest. We've now got boundary boxes that are 30 odd years old. And we're not seeing high numbers in terms of a percentage of the install base fail, but the trouble is the install base is huge at nearly 2 million. So you don't need very high percentage failures to mean an awful lot of work's needed to maintain them. Having said that, our strategy going forward, we don't think we're going to gain more or be able to reduce leakage by doing more in terms of find and fix. It really is just using that to maintain leakage. We've already got high numbers of resource, both in terms of leakage detection teams and also fix teams out on the network, and there really isn't scope to increase that anymore. So moving on to driving leakage down, and we saw in Joe's slides the sort of the key components of the strategy that the companies can follow, and you can see them listed out there. And as you drive leakage further and further, you go progressively down the list. As I said, we don't really see much benefit in driving increased levels of leakage control, find and fix. We're already at the maximum. So we're moving more into smarter networks and network optimization. We've had substantial network optimization programs on the network for the last 10 years. By the end of this AMP, we think that all of the cost-effective optimization schemes that are out there to be done on the network will have been done. So we won't have any more scope to reduce leakage further by putting in PRVs, putting in more pump control systems. This AMP, we've started putting in the network of smart meters for customers. By the end of the AMP, we'll have half of our customers, so 1 million customers, on smart meters, and we'll be driving leakage out through that, using those to better identify when the customers have leaks in their supply pipe. And the early data suggesting that's quite successful at reducing that. And about a third of the network leakage comes from the customer supply pipes. But as we go into the next AMP and want to drive even further down towards background leakage levels, we're going to have to do more mains replacement work and asset replacement work. And our asset replacement rates in Anglian, but also across the industry in the UK, are very low compared to some overseas companies. But it's extremely expensive to do it. And really targeting the right assets to replace is key. Going forward, and I don't think we necessarily know how to do that properly yet, because if we don't do that, it's just not cost effective. Well, we won't be allowed to raise bills enough to cover it. Okay, so I think that was all I was going to cover today. Joe, I hope I've done that. Caught you up some time.
Excellent, and there have been some interesting questions coming in. I've changed device. Can everyone hear me? I hope. So David's described what they're doing as one of the leaders as far as leakage, and so I'll be moving over to, it was going to be Paul. We have Jez coming up. There's Paul. So he'll be talking, he's the chair of Leakage Network.
Yeah, afternoon everybody. Can you hear me okay? Hope you can. Yeah, so Paul Taylor, Severn Trent, Assurance Manager, going to talk about some of the points coming out of the leakage network. As guys have said, we had the network meeting on Monday, Tuesday this week. For those that don't know, so this is a Water UK network. There are other networks from Water UK, and we meet on a quarterly basis and talk about leakage performance, leakage news, what's going well, what isn't. Talk about opportunities, risks that are coming out, and Joe Sanders and Dean came down, talk about the leakage Routemap. So I'm just going to pick up a couple of points from that, and I want to talk about one of the themes from the, oh, we'll get a bit of echo now. If we can go on mute. Thank you. So you've seen this slide already in Joe's presentation. I think, as he said, all companies are at different points on their sort of investment plan, their trajectory down to 15% for this AMP and 50% by 2050. And I think we recognise that, and we do that as part of our price review each 5 years. But I think the Routemap allows us to look a little bit further out at that horizon, what we need to be doing going forward. And I think we mentioned background leakage a couple of times already, but I think, how close are we to background leakage? Some companies, we were talking on Monday, are actually, we've got some companies or some zones within companies are actually quite low levels of leakage now, and are really targeting small volumes of leakage in those DMAs. And we can't keep just throwing more money at active leakage control and find and fix. We need to find different ways of tackling that. You know, Severn Trent, for example, have just in the process of taking on 30 more what we call water network technicians for our find teams, and that's, we believe the leakage is out there, but we still need that army of people that are on the ground finding leaks and obviously fixing them as well. And have we exhausted pressure management opportunities? So David's just mentioned that. So maybe in terms of new pressure management, new PRVs, we perhaps have. We're getting down to quite small benefits from new schemes. Maybe that moves us onto pressure management, onto modulation and resolving transients, and maybe onto bigger schemes of sort of pump control with wider coverage and wider savings, and that overall view of a calmer network. I think that all those things are being done, and have been done for the last couple of AMPs in terms of pressure management. And then maybe we'd move on to the newer area of smart networks and smart metering. We look to the companies like Anglian that have got high meter penetration, and look at how they're dealing with the data that's coming in from that. Really, I think the challenge is what we do with all of the data, and how we can quantify the benefits from smart metering. We've all probably got a view of what a smart network is, and again, how we deal with the data and quantify the benefits from that. But for a company like Severn Trent and others, that's probably the opportunity into this AMP and into the next AMP is around smart metering. And then, as has been mentioned already, ramping up mains renewal, which may be mains renewal, maybe common pipe renewal, maybe even supply pipe renewal, depending on where the policy goes with that. So we're all at different places. We obviously recognise that, and I think it's understanding where we are on that trajectory down, and having that longer horizon to look at what are the things we need to start doing now that are going to deliver us benefit in the future. And I think although we're at different points, we can still help each other. And this is the second point I want to make, which is one of the themes of the Routemap report, which is around the information and knowledge share and collaboration. And I recognise that there is lots of collaboration, and that, you know, we're here today sharing what we're doing, and there are lots of groups. Say Water UK has a number of network groups. There are regional network groups, and then lots of different benchmarking and hackathons and deep dives that happen. And I think we can just do more of this. This is a little bit of a plea for help on this basis. So water companies do it. I think they should be doing more of that benchmarking. What's working well, what doesn't work so well. Can we do it with suppliers and consultants and our contractors to help us do that? At the Leakage conference a couple of months ago, I used the example of acoustic loggers and acoustic networks. So a lot of water companies have gone out and installed these networks, and I don't think we've really come back as a group and discussed what's working well, what isn't. How are we using them? Are we optimizing our networks enough? And I think water companies need to be doing that, but I'd also look to our framework suppliers to help us do that and pull us together that enables that to happen. And I think I genuinely don't think we will get to those lower levels of leakage if we don't share more and if we don't collaborate more. I think there's plenty of space in this area to do more work. So as I say, this is a bit of a plea to get involved with that and help make that happen. And maybe we just do need to pull all of these groups together and maybe need a platform of where this might come together, where we can share information. So yeah, I'd love to see consultant suppliers getting more involved with that knowledge share. Really about learning of what's worked well, what hasn't worked so well. I think a colleague at the meeting on Monday made the point that we go to lots of conferences and talk about the next shiny widget, process, service that's available. We don't necessarily look back and say what hasn't worked so well. So I think that would move us on quicker if we did more of that. So that's all I wanted to cover. Thank you. I think we're moving on to Jez now.
Yep. So Jez will talk about some of the innovation areas that we need to work on. And just a reminder to keep posting questions. Some of them did disappear for me. I lost Teams for a short while and had to re-log in, but I'll do my best. Jez, over to you.
Lovely, thank you very much, Joe. And yeah, I'm just going to take you through some of the innovation stuff that we've got coming through. So as you just heard, collaboration is going to be key, and innovation as well. And that's got to occur in the UK on an unprecedented scale. Okay, we've got to make a step change in how we collaborate and how we innovate within the UK. Okay, and there are opportunities to adopt knowledge and innovation from outside the UK, but they're limited. Okay, and part of that is due to the UK requirements, you know, on how we manage our leakage and everything else like that. Obviously, we've got customer supply leakage. That's not an issue that a lot of other water companies have to deal with, because effectively they go, once it goes past the meter, as far as we're concerned, that's a customer issue. In the UK, we count that as leakage, and therefore that's something we've got to address. So that's quite a UK situation. Once I know other countries do look at supply pipe leakage, but not in the same way as we're going to have to. Mains renewal has already been mentioned. So in the UK, we tend to be going about 0.2 to 0.3% per year renewal rate. Some water companies in the UK, 0.1% per year. We've got to see a change to that. But one of the big challenges we've got on that is is interruptions to supply. So effectively in the UK, we are, I'm not going to say penalised, but encouraged strongly, let's use that phrase, encouraged strongly not to interrupt customers for more than 3 hours. Okay, we have to report it if we do. And that's one of our KPIs effectively. As a result of that, there's loads of great solutions which I know of worldwide, but if they mean that an interruption to the supply is going to be longer than 3 hours, so semi-structural liners and things like that, that instantly there's a disincentive in the UK. So there's some huge issues there in terms of what we can do. Okay, and really what we're trying to do here is draw together the research programs we've got. So UCWIT, UK Water Industry Research, I'm the program lead on leakage in there and kind of driving that research side. but also we've got the national innovation competition that's happening there with Ofwat putting money up there. We've got company programs as well, and I know that a lot of the suppliers are developing stuff as well. What we need to do is bring that together into a kind of holistic development plan that says, okay, here's all these strands going on, but in order to hit this leakage, in order to drive it down in this way and hit these demanding targets, we need to work together. So look, what I've done is I've started to bring that all together, and I said, okay, I've gone through this program here and I've come up with 9 themes. Okay, 9 themes that we kind of need to work through. And then I said, okay, within those 9 themes, what does UCWIR? Okay, now that's pretty much fundamental research. Okay, it tends to come out with paper-based research and reports. What does UCWIR need to do? What do we need to see coming through from the various innovation competitions, the Catalyst and Transform projects? What can we get from those? What can the water companies be doing as well? Obviously, they've got their own innovation programs, but there's also things like best practice and sharing and collaboration, adoption of new techniques, and then also third party. And sorry, but kind of grouping together everybody there, the regulators, supply chain, academia, consultants, and going, okay, what do we need to get from them? And so I've gone through each of these themes and said, okay, for each of those, what are we looking at? And, you know, we're kind of reasonably short of time, so I'm not going to go through absolutely everything here, but I want to pick out the ones that I've highlighted in red, because those are the kind of like key ones for me at the moment. So one of the main bits is quantifying background leakage. And the reason for that is that sets the pathway that each company will be on. You know, how do we have different strategies going forward? Because we're all at a different start point. And part of that is understanding our background leakage side. Okay, so you'll see on the left there, UCWIR, we need to analyse and quantify the minimum achieved leakage and the minimal achievable leakage. We need to come up with a standard way for every company to define that together and say, we understand our starting points. Okay, looking at the water companies, we need to develop and adopt consistent reporting on that as well. So there's a standard way that we can do for the reporting, and then taking that and then going, okay, let's look at getting that methodology accepted by the regulator as part of PR24, so that we've got a common standard that we all agree that's where we're starting for, and that's what drives my program going forward. As you can see, there's a number of other areas as well. Unfortunately, I don't have time to go into all of those, but do have a look at those as well. So, okay, theme 2. Better understanding of our supply pipe leakage. And there's a real bit there with the innovation competition. Yeah, looking at open data. So we've mentioned there's a lot of stuff coming through in terms of smart metering. That gives us a lot of understanding on supply pipe leakage, how much it is, and quantifying that. But at the moment, there's no common standard upon that. And I've taken part in some hackathons actually looking at smart data coming out from these. It'd be really great to come up with some open data standards that allow us to share and analyze multiple companies' data, so we can start to get a better understanding of supply pipe leakage. And then we've got optimizing network pressures, obviously trying to drive that down to minimal levels and such like. And it's really interesting. We've done a whole piece of work at my company, SES Water, looking at this on networks that we thought previously we'd turned down. Okay, and we've got some really good reductions in leakage as a result of optimizing our networks. There's still stuff that could be done there. We've done about 1/3 of our network. We've got another 2/3 to go. We're going to be finishing in the next 4 years or so. But yeah, there's certain stuff there, and looking, you can see I picked up on the innovation competition, looking at pump management, small pump installations, tool building solutions, and then looking at the third party, encourage and incentivize companies to adopt pressure management and network calming techniques that maximize asset longevity. Is looking at, okay, how do we actually come up with pressure management solutions and calming things that makes our assets last a long time. And I think I'm looking there at the regulators and people like that going, okay, we will allow these kind of solutions to be adopted within the companies in an easy way. Okay, theme 4, smart networks. Huge area, as you've heard, and there's one that's going to be increasingly common in the UK. I chair a conference that looks at a lot of the smart network stuff coming through, and previously I thought that the rest of Europe have really kind of overtaken us in this area and launched on ahead. In fact, from what I'm seeing at the moment, I think the UK is actually becoming a leader in this particular area, and I'm aware of smart networks that are world leading within the UK water companies. Okay, that's really interesting. But really it's what we do with that. And again, I think for me, the great bit is that we've got these smart networks coming through, but I think the real bit there is investigating the potential for common standards on smart network data. So it makes it really easy for companies to adopt it. We were talking earlier about collaboration and sharing. I'll come back to that, but we are actually doing a collaboration piece on our own smart network, just so that people can understand our learnings and practice from that side. Theme 5. Efficient and effective active leakage control, ALC. with reduced resource. One of the challenges we've got is actually recruitment, and Joe will tell you from RPS is that, you know, really quite struggling in terms of getting trained staff coming into this industry. So given that we may not have the same number of staff, how do we make sure that we're doing efficient and effective ALC? And it's kind of optimizing that and just making sure that we can achieve the same with less, as they always say. Just making sure that we've got that opportunity and that we dovetail in those smart networks that we're seeing with the ALC technicians to make it more efficient and effective. Innovative leakage repair. Yeah, this is one of my bugbears. I've said it before, I'm going to say this one again, is that we still use the same technique that the Romans used: dig a big hole, piece through, cut out the bad bit and piece through. I've got to come up with better ways of doing repairs. And it's a real challenge within the water industry because you're operating on a food standard product. Yeah, you can't just do, you know, put anything down that pipe to do the repair. There's a whole host of regulations we've got to go through as well. And also we've got this 3-hour interruption time, which is a real stymie in terms of that bit as well. So that's a real tricky area, but we need to be working on it. So from an UPWIP point of view, looking at how we can develop fast track testing methodologies for innovative repairs, using the innovation competition there, develop test sites, and we're aware of that going on at the moment. There's a project being awarded funded recently that's setting up a network that we can try things out on, which would be absolutely great. Isolated from the Clean Water Network, but similar to it, and allows us to try things out. And then also looking at how we can investigate ways to reduce the time taken for Reg 31. Reg 31 is the approval technique for anything in contact with clean water out upon the network. It takes a long time to go through, and some of you are aware of that from the supply side. We really need to investigate how we can accelerate that process so we can bring these solutions through. But that's a major one for me. We talk about PALM a lot in leakage, so prevent, aware, locate and mend. A lot of companies will spend millions on their awareness and location, and the bits that we need to be concentrating a lot on are prevention and mend, that we can drive down repair times and that we can stop leaks breaking out in the first place. Okay, theme 7, renewing the network and ensuring leak-free mains. Yeah, that comes back to my prevent side there. Okay, and we are laying a lot of plastic, not enough, and that's the bit that we've got to look at. I think also we're going to be looking at how we can reduce the cost of laying, and certainly a lot of companies are now looking at structural, semi-structural liners and things like that that can actually replace pipe with lower cost and lower carbon costs. There's a lot of carbon costs embedded in digging up a road and then reinstating. So we're looking at, there's a couple of things there, introducing an accreditation scheme for joining of plastic pipes. That's a suggestion, that's one of the things that we're looking at the moment. Just to make, you know, just try and stop leaky pipes occurring. And certainly within UPWIP, one of the things we're doing at the moment is I'm running a project that's looking at brand new networks that have been laid, typically new estates, okay, and looking at what's the leakage level on these brand new networks so we can understand how much leakage is occurring on new plastic. I have to admit, I've seen some pretty frightening figures from companies that carry out the pressure testing. And I noticed a comment from Scottish Water as well. But the figures I've seen from some of the companies that carry out pressure testing suggesting that a large number of new pipes are being laid that leak, and that's predominantly down to the fittings and jointing techniques. Hence, we're looking at the possibility of something like accreditation scheme there. And then again, looking at the regulations, the ODIs can be modified to enhance the adoption of innovative solutions there as well. And that's particularly looking at that 3-hour interruption time and things like that. Theme 8, developing a decision-making framework. And that's pretty much going, okay, how do we prioritize our route maps? How do we make sure that this all dovetails in together? How do we get that cooperation and collaboration together between the various water companies and all the other interested parties involved here? We don't want to be duplicating work. We don't want to be going down blind alleys. So I think there's a real piece here for getting that collaboration coming together, and that kind of leads into theme 9 as well, this information and knowledge sharing that's been talked about earlier. There's a real piece here to actually make sure that we are learning and sharing together. And as I said, you know, my company's doing a showcase at the end of this month where we're actually going to be doing a 2-hour showcase on our smart network to kind of show the kind of learning that came out from that. And that's kind of one of the things that we're encouraging within the water industry, that we actually start to go a bit of a deep dive into those projects and say, this is what we've done, this is what we're seeing coming out from them as well. So there we go, Joe. I think that's me. I'm going to stop there.
Great. Well, thank you very much. And I noticed that there were several questions about now if all the speakers want to bring up their cameras, and a reminder for other people to keep their cameras cameras and microphones off. There have been several questions about leak-free new networks and renovated networks. I know that Joe has done some work on looking at the strength of PE, and I know that with Jez it's something he's very interested in as well. So maybe Joe, if you'd like to talk about that first, then Jez, and I shall invite Paul and David if they have any comments to chip in after that.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. And so pulling up on a few of the comments that have been made by the likes of Ben and others, I think Steve mentioned one as well earlier, that we've got a product in PE pipe that the pipe will last 160 odd years. We did done an Upqueer project that'll last 160 years. Fantastic, tick. The joints aren't going to last that long if we put them in the way that we're putting them in at the moment. What we put into the route map was actually enhanced QA, be it some of your tools, Ben, that you've got, be it sort of pressure type sort of tests. But the other thing was also making sure that contractors were given that time to actually do that work properly. So we didn't just put in a normal mains renewal sort of TR61 type sort of value. We actually sort of went, okay, well, this is what it is at the moment. What we're looking at is something that will take longer. Would obviously mean that the customer's going to be out for longer as well. So again, the sort of the interruptions to supply piece comes into it as well. But we sort of make sure that piece of pipe we bury it and we don't come back to it for 160 years. So none of us have to come back to it. And I think that's where we try to get to with the route map, to say this is what we mean by leak-free network, is that it like 99.999% leak-free for 5, 10, 15 years. And if you get that, then at the moment with the what we're seeing with the networks that are being put in, it only takes 1 or 2 bad joints over 20, 30, 40 kilometers of mains renewals, and actually the leakage levels are higher, or well, the same or higher than what you're putting in at the moment. And I think this is something that really needs to be sort of like looked at. So it's something we need to sort of push forward there. And as I say, Jess, if you've got anything that you wanted to add on to that.
Yeah, completely agree, Joe. And it's just interesting seeing, the certification standards coming through in the questions there as well. Completely agree with that. I'll say this is a personal viewpoint rather than kind of, but personally, I think certification would certainly help. I can't see it hindering. It's something that other countries do. I'm off to Germany actually to have a look at meet with some of the German water companies to understand how they successfully use that. I think the Upqueer project that we're looking at, that will certainly kind of start to tease out where we're getting the leakage. We kind of know it, but we just want to get that definitive evidence displaying where it's occurring and what's causing these issues. But I think that will drive a change. It will drive a change within our industry about how we approach laying plastic pipe, because at the moment it's a little bit of throw it in the ground, pressure test it, and don't worry about it. We've got to start really thinking about laying leak-free networks in a completely different way. I agree with you. I've just seen the comment about quality assurance, quality control. Absolutely, yeah. And at the moment, that's just, in my opinion, is just not there. I want to get the evidence, which is where we're getting from the Upqueer projects. And do you know what? I'll put that out there now. If you've got evidence that you've gathered, and I've certainly had suppliers contact me with evidence that they've got, brilliant. Please send that through to me. Yeah. Contact me and just let me know any evidence that you've got, whether it's anecdotal, whether it's actual figures. All of this helps us when we're actually starting to introduce things like accreditation or quality controls and things like that. That's all stuff that we require in order to assist that process.
David or Paul, anything you want to add to that? Because I know David, certainly there are extensive PE networks in Anglian.
I
Any views?
It's not an area I'm particularly close to be honest. But I mean, you're right, Joe. We do have a big PE network, so it is vital that when we lay more, which we will do, that it's leak free. I guess in terms of a broader piece on prevention, there's some questions about what are we doing to prevent leaks. So clearly, part of it is leak free new networks. We are doing lots of work around network optimization. So calming the network to try and prolong the asset life, prevent leaks from happening. And we're also just installing a network of pressure transient monitors across the network, which in themselves don't prevent the problem, but they let us look for sources of the transients. So that can be our own infrastructure, our pumps, the way we're starting the pumps, but they can also be the way that customers are taking water from us. So if we can identify the source of the transient, then we can do something to either on our own assets or working with the customers to smooth how they're taking the water, which then does help prevent leakage going forwards. Someone was asking how much we spend on prevention. I mean, I don't have the figures. I guess prevention is two sides. One is the optimization transient monitoring. That's around about £15 million we spent last year on the optimization schemes and the sensors. There's another side to it, which is mains rehab. We don't particularly do that for leakage purposes only. That's driven by removing burst main clusters, and I don't have the figures for that. But it will be millions of pounds. So a substantial amount we're spending already. I think there's more to do.
Phil Clisham asked an interesting question, although directing at Jez. I think it's applicable to all of you. And someone else asked about Reg 31, and it's certainly been recognised that this gets in the way. Is there anything that can be done by the wider pipeline industry, or for instance PIG, to help push for Ofwat to reconsider how they apply the regulations, and DWI Reg 31, so the 3-hour reg, the Reg 31 and all of those restrictive regulations?
So I think, let's firstly recognise that these regulations are there for a purpose. Okay, they're trying to protect the water quality. It's not that the regulations are wrong in being there. I completely get it. And when I talk with my lab side, they are absolutely on the ball with these. They're there for a reason. Okay. I think the point behind this is more about streamlining that process. And I think there's one of the issues that we have is that, if you haven't got Reg 31 approval, no water company is allowing you to test equipment. Okay. So one of the things that we've got is this, as I said, Northumbrian are setting up this private network effectively separate from the network, where we can actually run it as a network and actually trial things out on that. That would be great because it'll allow you to dual process. You can actually do trials upon your equipment at the same time as going through Reg 31 approvals. That's a really helpful step. Good, like that. But I still think we need to look at Reg 31. And so therefore, again, I'll put the call out there. I'm really interested in examples that companies have got, where they struggle with the timescales for Reg 31, because I need to gather evidence to go back and say, look, these are the issues. I actually monitor the Reg 31 approvals list so I can see which companies are on it and which companies are kind of, no activity for a while. And you think, well, I'd be really interested in why there's been no activity for a while on some of these, what's the issues and struggles that you're having on there? Because I'd hate to think that there's a brilliant solution sitting out there, on this call today, and you're just sitting there going, yeah, I've got a solution that would solve it for the UK water industry, but I'm frustrated because it's just going to take too long to go through the regulatory process. And I think what I will do is just to add in a bit there about just recognise the different approach that the UK water industry is taking. Okay, there's a lot of comments that go, okay, why don't we just adopt practice from elsewhere? And I kind of talked a little bit about this earlier. But we are going down a different path from the rest of the world. People say, why don't you look at Tokyo? Why don't you look at, Singapore and things like that? Why don't you look at Holland? All of these countries have far, far higher replacement rates than we do. Okay, you talk with the Dutch companies, they're running about 2% on average in terms of replacement. I'm not going to go out on a limb and say it won't happen, but I think it's highly unlikely that the regulator will turn around and say, we will fund a huge replacement program across the UK in order to drive down the leakage. Okay, so therefore we've got to come up with other ways of doing it, and that's why we're seeing this innovation and collaboration in the UK water industry, because I'm not saying we're denied that tool, but it's very unlikely we will be using the tool that the rest of the world has used for driving down leakage. So therefore, we've got to come up with innovative and better solutions. And you've got, effectively within the UK, 20 water companies that are operating and collaborating together to drive that leakage down. I think it's going to be a real hotbed of innovation over the next 5 years.
I don't know if anyone has anything to add there. I think Jez has covered most of the points. There's several questions about targeting assets. David was asked which assets, causing the problems. If I can come in here and give a plug for the UK's National Failure Database, which was the first of its kind in the world and still has the longest continuous data of any failure database, and is currently being projects being let to update it, so that helps. But perhaps Paul or David would like to talk about how they monitor assets within their companies and identify what needs action, what action to take.
Well, I was just going to pick up John's comment there, the second to last one that we've had about that identification, and I think that is an area for improvement. I think I hear a lot of challenge from our internal teams, our leakage teams, about yes, okay, we might have a burst-driven policy or a leakage-driven policy on mains renewal, but I do hear a lot of challenge from our leakage teams of why certain DMAs or certain parts of DMAs have been promoted. And we get that back from our contractors as well about that. So I think that is an area that needs to be looked at. I think there's improvement there we could get.
David, have you anything to add there?
I agree that it is difficult to identify which sections are main to replace, but we definitely can't afford to do the lot. It's critical that we find a way. I mean, there are condition monitoring techniques that you can use. We've tried installing, doing step test or installing temporary metering to try and identify where losses are. But it is, quite often what you end up finding then is that it's a single leak that's causing the problem, and then you don't need to replace a long section of pipe. We just need to fix the leak. I mean, do they even exist in substantial numbers? These rotten sections of main that are going to drive a leakage reduction is a question that you don't necessarily know we know the answer to.
I'll just chip in. Yeah, so we've got some work going on UpQueer-wise. We're looking at how leaks develop. You'd have thought by now we'd know that quite well, but obviously when they're buried a metre underground, it's a bit hard to actually see that. So we've got PhDs working on this at the moment and looking at that kind of, leak to burst development. We can understand the nature of how they go. I think it's fair to say what happens with almost every company at the moment, well, all companies, is that we will do this by modelling. So effectively, we create a model of our mains network. Digital twin is the trendy phrase these days, but we have a digital twin of our network, and then we plug in the kind of leakage, the burst that we're seeing, and look at the kind of age, the pipe material and things like that. And that gives us a propensity for leakage and bursts. You calibrate your model by digging down, taking out little sections of pipe and going, yeah, that shows the model is correct or not. Where we're starting to see some really good NDT methods coming through, which are actually starting to give us a far better understanding of that. So again, we're doing a showcase on that where we've been doing some work. We've done a third of our network now where we're actually testing every ferrous pipe over 30 years of age using an NDT method. And that's given us some really interesting insight into actually the actual condition of those pipes, rather than by taking some sample ones. So yeah, there's some good knowledge coming through. And I think that is going to be a bit of sharing and that kind of understanding as well. So I think we'll probably be in a better condition to understand our pipes soon.
Great. Well, thank you for that. And I'm really sorry, but we have run out of time. There are more questions, and I think this is an area that maybe we could have further discussions. I will put in a plug for the conference which Joe mentioned at the beginning, the UK Leakage Conference, which if anyone's interested in these issues, well worth attending. The other thing to mention is that the UK Society for Trenchless Technology is taking some of the work looking at low or no dig repairs forward, and they're having a webinar on June the 30th, and then a face-to-face event at No Dig Live. So quite a lot's going on, and if anyone is interested in these areas, have a look at the UCWIR website for further information, and there will be further PIG events on this area as well, no doubt. So I'd just like to finish by thanking all 4 speakers. I know it was a bit of a whistle-stop tour. You could spend a day talking about this. In fact, these guys did spend a whole morning talking about it, and there were still more questions to be answered. I would also like to put in a plug for the Midlands branch, who effectively supported this presentation and put this forward as an idea for a PIG event, and say that if anyone who's listened to the webinar and isn't a PIG member, then do consider membership. It is well worth getting involved, whatever your connection to pipelines is. So thank you very much. Have a great day. If you manage to take some lunchtime off, enjoy your lunch, and see you at the next PIG event.